All right. Looks like the recording to the cloud has begun.
Thank you so much, Stephen. We're looking forward to what you have to share.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to be talking about developing a framework for quality online course videos. And we're going to take a good, sharp look at what does the research say to help inform us on where to look at what is meant by quality online course videos. So to introduce myself real quick, I am Dr. Stephen Crawford. I am the District Director for the Maricopa Center for Learning and Innovation, and that is part of the Maricopa Community Colleges in Maricopa County, Phoenix, Arizona area. So we are one of the largest community college districts in the country, and we work with 10 different colleges out of my center because we're out of the district office with our 10 colleges throughout the Maricopa County area. So today we're going to take a look at a couple different things, and our goals are to help you first define the various categories and types of instructional media. And then we're going to look at and appraise the research that informs our practice in developing multimedia for online presentations. We're also going to discuss how faculty instructional designers can apply these emerging best practices when designing online presentations. So to get things started, I like to have this framework of different types of multimedia out there so we can make sure we're talking about the same thing when we're discussing this topic. And I've done this by grouping multimedia into 4 different categories. The first one is audio presentations. I think this is one that is most often overlooked when it comes to multimedia because it's just simply audio. And it's also one of the simplest, least complex ways to develop presentations. You think about the audio podcast. Some of us will record audio presentations that students can download, but we can also use audio for course introductions, personal introductions, module introductions, lectures. We do, again, going back to the podcast, we can use audio to provide student feedbacks. And the reason why we like to do these things is so that people, our students, can hear our voice and they can hear how we feel and how excited we are about this topic, because we can now convey more than just the message, but we can convey the emotion behind it as well. Another thing that's great for audio presentations is the interview. Back when we used to have in-person conferences, and hopefully we'll have them again one day, you may come across an expert in your field who would be a wonderful guest speaker for your class, except for the fact you're both nowhere near your institution. Well, you could take your phone, because most of your smartphones today have an audio recording app built into it, and you can find a nice quiet spot, turn on the recorder, and conduct an interview. And by doing this, you are now bringing in that outside expert into your classroom, and you don't need any complicated equipment to do it. You just need to have a quiet place in your phone to record it. We have seen where people will use audio to do event or lecture capture. It's also a great way to set up role playing or case studies or different scenarios with your students. And the reason why audio is such a simple process to go is that it requires less work to produce. In most cases, you just hit the button, start talking, and you stop. And then your recording is done. There's not that much in the way of post-production to worry about, and you can kind of just make things happen, for lack of a better term. So to add one more layer of complexity would be the voice-over presentations. And this one, again, course introductions, personal introductions, and module introductions is a great way to do this. But it's also, I think this is a very popular one for providing that lecture, that content presentation, because now you're speaking to visuals. And one of the mistakes that people always talk about with PowerPoint and other slide decks is that we should never read the slides to the individuals. Let the individual read that slide themselves. And so by having quality visuals, and let's say you're talking about the anatomy, and you're talking about the parts of a human heart, and you're showing the different pieces, this is where you can use that voiceover presentation to really punctuate what you're saying, because you can highlight each part one at a time in your slides as you're talking about them. So the students can see exactly what you're talking about. And those visuals, it's again, when you think about it from the point of view of it requires less production work. It requires less stress on you as an instructor. You can just speak to the slide deck. Now, many of us started in the days of using some of these programs, and for those of us who've been in the field for many years, in my case over 20, we may remember going, oh, well, all I need to do is do a voice over PowerPoint, put it on my website. I'll just take my normal 50-minute lecture and bring it online. We're going to talk about that length a little bit later, but that's something to think about as we move forward. Now, the next step in complexity where you need to do a little bit more pre-planning to make things work well is the screencasting presentations. For me, I think one of the best ways to use this is through a demo of an application or process. So for an example, let's say you're providing a course tour to introduce your students to how your course shell is laid out so that they know what is where, and they kind of feel at home in your course shell as soon as they begin the course. Well, you can do this through a screencast. And one of the things that's really nice about this tool is that it has the ability to watch the mouse go across the screen, click a button. The student now knows exactly what to click. You can even zoom in on those parts of the screen as you talk about them and explain what those parts of the course are. One application I built, or demo of an application I built a number of years ago, was helping nursing students. We were going through the process of what's called a PICO question, where you have a very specific format for asking a question in healthcare. And the students needed to do a literature search based off of that, of the databases for current practices. And so we, with the help of a librarian and a faculty member, we described that process to the students. We showed them the text being typed into the box. They go, this is exactly what you type. Showed them the results, and then showed them our thought process for how to select which pieces of literature that we were looking for. So that way our students knew exactly what our expectations were. Another thing that I think screencasting is really, really good for, and we don't do enough of, is providing student feedback. Let's say your students submit a paper or a digital project to you, and you want to provide student feedback to that student. Well, there's a couple ways you could do it. You can annotate on the document and write on it and provide lots of text, but we're talking multimedia here. Another way to do that is you could screen capture yourself annotating that document, and then you can be speaking to it and highlighting and showing exactly why you're circling that, why you're highlighting that area, and explaining to the student where they did well, where they can improve, and other items like that. And I'm going to give one final example I think is really, really helpful. And this is where I point to Khan Academy as really popularizing this model of a screencasting presentation. And that is that of the writing. I used to work with a faculty member, and I'm going to start with a music example, who would have a camera on his keyboard, and therefore you would see where his hands were on the keyboard. Well, think about that from a math standpoint, and you're showing students how to go through the math of a chemistry or a physics problem, or maybe just a simple math problem. By talking aloud and having the camera focus on, or actually writing on the screen, the equations, that can help provide students that ability to see what's going on. And then finally, the most complex of the multimedia, which is unfortunately also the one we go to more often first, is the video presentation. And the reason why we go there first is simply as you see on the screen. So many of us have a smartphone with a camera that has high quality video. We're at a point in technology now where people are shooting full-length movies on their iPhones, and they're going into the box office. You know, when we used to go into movie theaters, there were movies that were made completely on an iPhone. We're seeing musicians create music videos. We're seeing so many high quality documentaries on YouTube that are all being done on mobile devices. We have what's called 4K cameras. That is such a high resolution that you can't tell the difference between that and what we would call our standard video camera that our professionals use. So when you have the technology coming together that quickly, it's very easy for us to just go, well, I'll just whip out my phone and record video. And yes, you can do that. But the thing is, with a video presentation, they work best when you pre-plan. And the more pre-planning you put into it, the easier it is to fix things on the back end. And that's one of the jokes that we hear often is, oh, we'll just fix it in post. When someone says that, what they're meaning is, we've made a mistake here. I will edit that and fix it in the post-production process. Well, the problem is if you didn't capture that on camera at any given time, there's nothing to go to. And that's one of the reasons why when people are creating case studies, and I've done this before, you may shoot the same scene 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times in a row because you may have one part may be the best part of that one take, and then the next best part could come from a different take. And so you're now splicing all these different takes together. That's what fixing it in post looks like. When you do a lot of pre-planning ahead of time, you may actually have one take that's good from beginning to end. And you're like, that's it. There's very little editing that needs to be done. So the more you plan, the better those come out. So let's take a quick turn and look at the research. And this is an important thing because a lot of times when we think about what quality video looks like, we go to the film school model. We go to a lot of things that filmographers think about, and that is pacing, that is going to be camera angles, a lot of very important things. But we need to take that into account because when we see in the research, because of the high quality videos, sometimes you're seeing a novelty effect. You're seeing students going, yes, I love this. This is cool. Video is great. And when I'm reviewing the research for some of the articles I've done for Quality Matters, that's the hard thing to sort through because you're looking for, is this research finding due to the fact that students were like, wow, this is cool, this is awesome? Or was it due because of the fact that it really was effective? And this is the big problem we saw in a lot of early technology and online learning. We saw a lot of people think that the Palm Pilot was the best thing ever introduced into the classroom because it was the first time they've ever worked with one. But if you do that exact same study after someone working with it for a year or two, that novelty effect is worn off, and now it's just a regular tool. Is that same result going to happen is the question. So that's one thing to watch out for when going through the research. The next thing, and this is the big one to me, is apples versus oranges. And this goes back to the film school comment I made. When you have a highly produced video and students are looking at it and their alternative is a static slide deck with no narration, just text, which one are you going to like? Would you rather read a document and have a slide deck on your screen? Or would you rather have this highly polished video where the screen has everything being displayed to you and it's narrated? So that's one of the things to watch out for in the apples versus oranges is that, are you measuring two like things, or are they like enough? And that's one of the things that you have to be really careful about when going through some of the research on video, is that they find, oh, video is the best thing that we ever did. Or again, some of the stuff on length, students liked 2-minute videos compared to 2-hour videos. I don't know about you, but yeah, I'd rather watch a 2-minute video because I have time for a 2-minute video. But if you're comparing it to a 2-hour video, is that similar content? Am I getting the same results? So those are things to think about, and you have to be really careful when looking into the methodology and what actually happened in the study to see, are they really measuring the same thing? Are they measuring apples to apples? And then this is the one that's very difficult for a lot of us in higher ed research was there a significant difference? I'm going to tell you, a lot of times the research says there's no significant difference. So if there's no significant difference, why would you want to do something different than what was being compared to? And that's going to be because there may be no significant difference, but you may have found a cost savings. You may have found a student preferences, just they liked it. So for an example, if you compared module introductions, audio versions versus video versions, and while on the surface they may sound like apples versus oranges, if it's the exact same content and one was cheaper to make than the other, and one you could drop and feel zero guilt because it had no production values, the audio in particular, it was just well recorded audio, is that, that's showing you that, hey, audio versus video, not a big deal. Go with the cheaper one. If the students are saying, hey, I'm not seeing a difference between these two things, but my favorite is this one, I'm more likely to listen or watch this one, then that says something to it. And even if it's not a significant difference, we can still do further research and see what's happening and what do the students really like and tease out more information. So that tends to be a problem sometimes, that we see so many studies that say no significant difference, but it doesn't mean that the study is worthless. It is actually informing us that there are some things here to think about. And if it's not making that big of a difference, that means it's not hurting either. So let's take some popular questions that come up. And these are some of the ones that I've been looking at over time. And the first one is, does including video in my course make a difference for my students? Well, the answer is pretty much like a lot of things, a little complicated. I'm going to start with the answer is going to be yes. We're seeing findings. Let me get some water real fast. We're seeing findings that show that instructor-generated video content can have a positive and moderate influence on student satisfaction when it comes to engagement in asynchronous online courses. So the presence of video is very important. We're also seeing some studies that says if you have publisher-generated content and you're replacing it with instructor-generated content, and more importantly, instructor-generated video lectures, this is now beginning to put a greater emphasis on the instructor. So that does increase the student's connectedness to the instructor. And so that can make a difference in helping to build that important sense of community and that sense of connection. And in fact, in 2018, there was a survey, I think it was from Wistia, that talked about 92% believe that video, and this is from faculty, that 92% believe that video increases student satisfaction with their learning experience. And so there is a very strong belief, especially on the faculty side. But we say that, and then you've got the but coming into play. And so for an example, the but is students have commented that, yeah, if you give me video and you give me a slide deck with notes on it, and the video is meant to supplement my slide deck, I might drop the slide deck altogether and only watch the video, which means they're missing key information. So you have to be very careful about what you do in those videos. If you are repeating content that is already in other parts of your course, say like the readings, the students may drop the readings in favor of the video. So that's something to keep in mind. But that being said, the fraction of students accessing lecture-oriented videos tends to decrease to about 40% by the end of the course. So there is a drop-off. You may have a high amount of students watching your videos and consuming the content via video, but they may be doing that less as the semester goes on. And so that's something to be very mindful of, is about that content fatigue and how are things going to be done. And we've seen that even in lecture-based courses where there's a lab component and that video prepares the students for the labs, by the time the semester is getting into the latter weeks, the students have stopped watching the videos despite those videos being intended to prepare you. So that is something to keep in mind, that there is a drop-off as the semester goes on. And this is where an area I'd like to learn more about is, are there studies that have a similar result on textbooks? The difference is textbooks don't report back to us who's read what. I mean, now with the new ebooks, we're getting that data maybe. But with videos, so many of us can look at our YouTube and our Wistia and our Vimeo stats, and we can actually watch the views go down. So we kind of know that from looking at the data that we do have access to. So another very popular question that comes up is, how long is too long? And this is a very complicated question. This goes back to the apples versus oranges problem, because we see a lot of studies that say that if you have in-person students and you're providing them videos in a flipped classroom or a blended learning classroom, that they want to see the videos be 1.5 to 3 minutes long. That's their preference. We're seeing students who are typically fully online go, yeah, 3 to 7. We like 3 to 7 minutes. And then we see, we do know that we've had students report that the length of the video will impact their viewing decision. So they look at the longer ones and go, oh, I'll watch that later, and then maybe not get to it. But they'll do the shorter ones now. And that's where telling them how long the video is going to be is useful, because the student may go, well, I have 20 minutes and this video is 15 and this one's 25. Which one do I watch? Well, I only got 20 minutes. I'm going to watch the 15-minute video. And so we are seeing students do those decisions. And in fact, we have seen that in one study, they found that 70% of the participants indicated that they were either more likely to watch a video with a time step, or they rarely watched one if it didn't have it. So having that, so that they would say, hey, look, if you at 70% of your students are more likely to watch a video if you tell them up front how long it's going to be, that's a good thing to tell them. And we're seeing that even high quality pre-recorded classroom lectures. That means back in the day when we had rooms full of students, if you recorded your lecture with the students in the room and you said, you know what, instead of putting this hour-long video online, I'm going to chop it up into little segments, students still aren't engaging in that. That's really interesting. That came from one study looking at MOOCs. The general consensus talks about chunking, and they talk about chunking things into 6-minute segments or less. I'm not, and that's what the research is saying, 6 minutes on that. And as an instructional designer, my advice has been stick to one idea. And if that one idea takes more than 6 minutes to convey, then ask yourself, are there subcomponents of that idea? Have I not mentally broken that idea up into smaller pieces? So I try to work with faculty to go to that 6-minute target. I recommend they never go over 10 minutes if they can. But the question I'm always asking is, what are you doing? And so for an example, I had a faculty member once, she goes, I've got a video, I can't get it below, 35 minutes or 30 minutes, however long it was. It's like, I just can't get it there. And so I said, well, what are you teaching? Well, the next thing she talked about was, it was 3 steps of some process. And as soon as she said the word 3 steps, I looked at her, she looked at me, and she goes, oh, each step is an individual video, isn't it? And I said, sounds good to me. And she went back into the sound booth and started recording again. So yeah, think about that as, how can I chunk this up? Because by giving the students the autonomy to listen to one piece at a time, and also the ability to re-listen to just that one piece as many times as needed, and maybe even do a self-check in between, is a great way to help your students. And for those, again, back in the old days, a number of us had, we just recorded our sessions, and they could be 2-3 hour long voiceover PowerPoints. And if you had to change one thing, you hoped that you had all the original files. Otherwise, you were re-recording a 3-hour lecture. And because you had to make one change on a slide, or you wanted to change one voiceover on a slide, by chunking it into smaller pieces, it's so much easier to just fix that one piece as opposed to doing other things. So it's more than just that. But at the same time, I'm going to point out, and this is where my film school friends will point out, they get mad at the 6-minute thing. They go, no, Look at TV shows. We go 30 minutes, we go an hour, we can do, heck, Gone with the Wind was almost what I think was almost 4 hours long. Braveheart was 3.5. You think about these long, Titanic, 3.5 hours. It's like, yeah, we can watch something. We have the attention span to watch very long videos nonstop. But our film school friends will point out that those are produced and designed a certain way to re-engage our brain every so often to make sure we don't wander off mentally. And that's the difference between instructor generated content and those developed by professionals. Professionals will often move things towards an edutainment standpoint. Think about Mythbusters. There's a reason why there are very few Mythbusters, if any, episodes that go on one problem all the way through. There's also a reason why there's commercial breaks in between, because that's giving your brain that mental break. When you look at things from brain rules, they're like saying there's a reason why we can only pay attention for 10 to 12 minutes without kind of wandering away, and that's why you have to re-engage people every so often. That's why the commercial breaks occur when they do. They're there going, oh, the average person's attention is going to wane soon. Let's interrupt now before it happens, and then re-engage them, and that way they stay engaged the entire time. Again, going back to the book Brain Rules, they will tell you in a 50-minute lecture, most of your students will remember two things: the first thing you said and the last thing you said. Everything in the middle kind of drops off. So that kind of goes to the next question of, do your students want to see you talk in your videos? And believe it or not, the answer is not really. They really don't want to see you that much. Now, we'll start with the fact that we have seen in the research that videos that intersperse the instructor's talking head, we're talking your kind of your standard lecture videos that are interspersed with slides, are considered more engaging. They want to see you every so often to get that connection. And that's why a lot of us will have our photo on the slide just to remind the students what we look like so they can see a face and reconnect when we're doing a voiceover slide presentation. Or in a video, we'll start with the video on of us, and then we may not show up on video again until the end. And that's because we're seeing that the student looking at your face does divide their attention. And there was one study that said that it can actually reduce their attention by about 30%. And even if you have a very small post stamp, and in fact, they said 4.8% of the screen was occupied by the instructor's video inside the box, and that was still enough to distract the students. So that's something to keep in mind about, is that your face on screen can be distracting. And I know that a lot of people like to do things. I've seen a number of video lectures that are produced, and they kind of do it like you see with Stephen Colbert or with his Colbert show, late night, or as you see with the different shows where they'll have the graphic on one side and them talking on the other the entire time. That works great on television because they're doing other tricks to keep people engaged. But as instructors, we're not often using those tricks. It's just us presenting content. And so we want to reduce that distraction as much as possible. But we do know that, and we also have seen that students, they do pay attention less, and that cognitive load is an issue. So let's talk about, if you're not on screen, then what do your students want to see? They want to see demonstrations is what they want to see. They want to see stuff. They want to see information. I'll go back to that jazz teacher I worked with years ago. We had this overhead camera installed so that it would show his hands on the keyboard, because looking at him as he explains the techniques didn't really matter. They wanted to see his hands do the techniques on the keyboard. And so they could hear him talk about what he's doing and why. They could see his hands do it and hear the output of the music at the same time. Again, going back to Khan Academy, we want to see the writing, the results of what that math. We don't want you to say, well, 4 plus 4 equals 8, and then, 8 plus 4 will carry the 1. No, we want to actually see you carry the 1. And so those are things to keep in mind as you're doing videos, is that we want to see what you're doing. If you're doing, again, going back to the introductory lab types of activities, and if you're doing the lab, we don't want to see a full body shot where it's your head, your body, the whole lab bench and everything. And then you see these beakers move around and you see, no, we want the camera to zoom in on what you're doing. We want to see your hands pick up that beaker, put it where it needs to go. We want to see it. Sure. We want to see it. We want to get that eyeball of the measurement. We want to see things. And so keep in mind the demonstration. They want to see what's being done. Um, and we also want to see you highlight key information. We want you to, the students, the research is saying that it helps keep the students focused on what we're talking about. So for an example, on the screen, you see the question we're asking. I'm keeping you focused on what do your students want to see? They want to see key information. I don't have that. I don't have that. And I don't have all the research I'm talking about written on the screen on purpose because that would distract you. If I'm reading the screen to you the entire time, then they can just turn the audio off and get a better experience reading the screen themselves. Or they just stop watching because it is a distractor. You want to make sure you're playing that correctly. So seen a model of video that's kind of interesting. I've only seen it pop up in the research a couple of times, and I know some of the folks who do this, and that is, should you include a video of yourself tutoring other students? Now, I mentioned about the classrooms and how that just didn't, students didn't watch those videos. It wasn't engaging for them. They didn't like seeing other students in the classroom and the faculty member teaching at the front doing their thing. But believe it or not, research is showing it may not be a bad thing to have one or two students on screen with you. So I've seen, and again, this is usually done in a studio, and you have a faculty member with one or two students with them, and they may be talking about a concept, and the students are asking critical questions. Now, this is where it goes back to, this is complicated and it requires a lot of pre-planning. And so you need to script this out well ahead of time, because those students who are acting as tutors, they're a surrogate for the student who's watching the video. And so they need to be asking questions that that average student watching the video would ask. So it gives students permission and ability to go, I don't understand this, and so the student then would ask a question that would then cause the instructor to provide a second explanation. So think about it from this point of view. I know students get tripped up on this one concept. I teach it the way I always teach it, but because I know they get tripped up, I will do a second video for those who are confused or who think they might be confused. Well, odds are the students are going to watch one video or the other. They're probably not going to watch both, because they probably think they understand what happened the first time if they watch the first video, and they don't need the second video. But if it's part of the same video and I teach that concept, and then the student on screen goes, but what about this? Or I don't understand that, because that's a common question that comes up. Now I can explain it a second time, and that creates a connection. So we have seen that those scenes of conflict do encourage and motivate your students to try harder. And it shows to them it's not a simple A to B process, but it does meander a little bit. And by having that student on screen be that surrogate, it does help quite a bit in doing that. So we've talked about some high quality setups, but again, do you have to have that studio setup with high quality video? Is that necessary? And the answer is going to be no, you don't have to have that. Does it help? Of course. And if you're going to do that, you're going to want those videos to be useful for more than just one semester. You're going to want to use that video in multiple classes because you're putting an investment into that. But we have seen where you don't have to have that video set up. In fact, there is one researcher. What she did was she had a faculty member that did an A/B test. Version A was the faculty member she had her script for her course introduction and her personal introduction, and she went to a studio, professional lighting, professional backdrop, all the bells and whistles, and she introduced her course and herself to her students. And then in the B group, she did the exact same thing using her computer's webcam, had the exact same script, sat in her office, bookcase and door behind her, and open window, that was the lighting, and talked into the camera. And that was the video she recorded for the B group. And the difference was no significant difference. The students didn't see a big deal between the two. What they did say was they found that the homemade video, the DIY version, the one that she made herself, they found that version of the video more welcoming, more real because it wasn't polished. They thought that was a more real version of her than the other students, because the other students said, yeah, she was in the studio, she looked polished, that was nice. And so that's something to keep in mind, is sometimes you can put too much polish on a video and you can put too much quality into it by being in that controlled environment. I will say the most important thing that you have to get right is the audio. You can't have audio problems. If you have audio problems, that will just be a barrier to the content presentation, and you can't, that's hard to recover from. And so always having a good quality microphone will come into play. So for an example, I have my blue microphone. I use a Yeti that I'm talking on here today, but I also have a lavalier microphone that I can plug into my iPhone for when I'm doing videos outside of the house. And that's one of the things I think we need to think about. It's very hard to do, and I'm going to pick on geology, in a studio. Yes, you can have a rock, you can zoom in, you can do all that great stuff. But living here in the Phoenix area and living in Arizona as a whole, if you're teaching geology, you can't bring the Grand Canyon into the studio. So I take an iPhone with me. I would make sure I have a good microphone because it can get a little breezy there. And as I see the rock formations, I could teach the rock formations on camera, and that way someone can have that and be able to post that into my course. That's a great way to bring the real world into your online classroom. Um, and that's where you need, if you're going to do things on your own, you want to be careful of the background. You want to get rid of the extra stuff. Um, with all of us being on camera with our Zooms and our WebExes and our Microsoft Teams and our Google Meets, um, we're seeing a lot of people putting their bookshelves behind them. And I don't know about you, but I am looking to see what's in those bookshelves. And there's some pretty interesting books on some people's bookshelves. Um, and so those things can become distracting for your students. You want to be careful with what do you have in that background. I'm not saying get rid of the bookshelves for the record, because it does make you look like a person, but think about what you have in your background and what is it saying about you, and is it a distractor? Um, and then you also want to think about, again, you're trying to make sure that you're just eliminating any unnecessary information. So this is a big one that comes up a lot. If you have deaf or hard of hearing students, do you need to do closed captioning? And I'm just going to put it simply that yes, you do. This is something you really need to be doing for all of your students. Spoiler alert, there's an article coming out from Quality Matters shortly that I just finished writing that will be addressing this topic and explaining why. Here's the sneak peek. The research is showing us that a majority of our hearing students, the students who are not deaf, the students who are not hard of hearing, our hearing students are using your closed captioning. They're using it because they are in public transportation and they can't hear very well on their earbuds, and they need to see the words. When I fly, yes, I have a good set of quality headphones, but I turn on the captions when watching Netflix. Your students may be at work and they may be in a cube farm and they can't turn the audio on. They have to have closed captions. They may be at home and they do not want to disturb their spouse, children, or anybody else living in their house. And therefore they have to have the captions. These are things that are very important for a lot of our students. We're also seeing in the research that captioning helps keep your students on track. If they slip out from their attention and they kind of just drift off briefly, seeing the words on the screen can help get them back onto the content much more quickly than without. So these are things that are very, very important. And we've really got to have, they're important for all students. And so with that being said, what does it mean to have accurate closed captions? Because that's a very important thing. And I'll give another little hint of what's coming up in the paper. The national standard for closed captions on television is not 100%. It is 98%. And that 98% accuracy includes not just typos, but it also includes that the words have to show up within, I think it is 7 seconds of it being spoken on screen. And most of our TV programs actually do that. But when you rely on live captions, such as those you find in YouTube, if they're getting the nouns wrong, you're in trouble. And more often than not, YouTube live captioning is missing on the nouns. So if they don't know what the noun is of what you're talking about, the students have no clue what you're talking about. So you really need to be able to go in there and repair those captions and get them to be more accurate so the students can learn solely from the captions if they need to. And let's see here. Next up, should you require students to be on camera during a video conference session? And I will tell you, the answer is I don't know. There's not much research out there right now. And part of the problem of that is that we're trying to figure this out with remote learning. I'm very curious into this question. I will tell you that this is a more complicated question than I think most people realize. It's not as simple as, if you don't turn your camera on, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know you're paying attention. And I know there's some faculty out there who they want cameras on all the time so they can know their students are paying attention, but that's distracting. And also Zoom fatigue, as we've heard it called often, being on camera for that long with the eyes not always looking directly into the camera, it's disconcerting. There's a lot of psychological pieces coming on. It can be distracting for your students seeing all the little camera boxes move around while also trying to look at the content. It goes back to that other piece we were talking about earlier. Also, you get into some privacy issues. You get into bandwidth. There's a lot of questions. And there's some students who, again, it's a very complicated question. And I will say flat out, the research is not clear as to what the better answer is yet. So I've provided a handout to everybody, which you can download. And those are links to my first 4 articles that I've written for Quality Matters. They have the references for most of what I've talked about here today. And that 5th article, Captions Help All Learners, will be coming out shortly. So keep an eye on the QM newsletter for that. And you will see more information on that topic, as well as the resources used for that article as well. There are more articles to come that will touch on some of the items I've been working on and talked about here today, and other things that are emerging in the research. So that's where I'd recommend looking for what are the best practices and what can you give to somebody else to help guide them. So take a look at those. And if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. I can be reached at stephen.crawford@domail.maricopa.edu. And that was on the first slide. So, or actually second slide of the presentation. So let me hop back to that real fast. So there's my contact information. I can also be found on Twitter. And I hope you really enjoyed this presentation, and I will see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I'm going to stop the recording.